going to mute everybody and bring you back up. All right.
All right. Everybody hear me? Give me a thumbs up, Kevin. All right. Well, first, I appreciate everyone joining us today. I've had the chance to speak to several of you over the past few months, and I think some of you have heard me say I tried to couch my comments over the past few months into things that I know and things that I don't know and things that I think. I can tell you that the first things I know, it's a much smaller subgroup than the things I don't know and the things that I think. And I'd ask that you kind of take my comments today in the context of those things. What I told you I know, what I told you I don't know, and what I tell you I think, because what is important as you guys write things in the media is that you take everything I said in the proper context, because you know that Razorback fans take what you say literally and run with it from time to time. And so I just ask for your help in that regard today. There's still many things that are unknown and still haven't been decided, and we're working through those hour by hour and day by day. And today's May 27th, and I think back to what everything looked like just 2 months ago, and I imagine 2 months from now what it will look like. And we will make better decisions as an industry the further we can get into the summer before we make many of those decisions. And as I know it has been for each of you, the past few months have probably been the most challenging of my career in college athletics. And there have been many tough decisions that have had to be made. And while many of those decisions were difficult, they were a little bit easier because they were made with the ongoing commitment that we have to the health and safety, first and foremost, for our student athletes, our staff, and then for Razorback fans. And I'm grateful during this time for the leadership of Commissioner Greg Sankey, Chancellor Joe Steinmetz, and our Board of Trustees. The most difficult part of this whole ordeal has been seeing the disappointment in our student athletes not being able to compete and finish up what they was shaping up to be a very competitive end to the winter and start of the spring sports seasons. But as we wrapped up the 2019-20 year, we began to look forward to 2021 and what was that going to look like. And thanks to the hard work of our medical team, our facilities and maintenance staff, many of our coaches, our athletic trainers, our strength conditioning teams over the past several weeks, we're prepared to welcome back many of our student athletes on June the 8th for voluntary workouts. And we have a plan it's customized to the state of Arkansas and the University of Arkansas. You will see varying plans across the country and across the Southeastern Conference. And we've relied on the medical experts and develop our plan and consult in consultation with the Arkansas Department of Health, our UA campus environmental health and safety officials, following the guidelines that were provided last week by the SEC Medical Task Force, and the ongoing guidance from many of our federal and state agencies. And just as in anything in athletics or in life, no plan can guarantee that anyone affiliated with our program will not contract COVID-19. What our plan was developed to do was to mitigate the risk of all involved and outline some protocols for working together efficiently and effectively when a diagnosis is made for both the student athlete and those they have come in contact with or a staff member. And our goal has been and continues to be to instill confidence in our student athletes, their parents, our athletic department staff, that they can return safely to campus. So today I thought I'd take you through some of the basic tenets of our plan, and I'd be happy to take some of your questions after that. But let's talk about the timeline first. As you know, the SEC presidents and chancellors, on the heels of the NCAA council decision, voted to allow student athletes to return to campus beginning June 8th for voluntary workouts. At the University of Arkansas, our plan will be admitted based on two criteria: the phasing of our facility reopenings and the groupings of our returning of our student athletes. So on June the 8th, we'll enter phase one of our facility plan, and our student athletes will have access to weight rooms, athletic training rooms, and limited conditioning areas, which really means outdoor fields. At the same time, we'll welcome back student athletes in a group one, and I think there's a slide that you guys are going to see. So our first group of student athletes to return would be our fall sports student athletes: football, soccer, volleyball, men's and women's cross country, along with men's and women's basketball. That's second, and that would be on June the 8th. And that group does not include any of our incoming freshmen in each of those sports. Group 2, June the 22nd, gymnastics, swimming and diving, men's and women's track and field, which makes up our winter sports. Our third group would be our incoming freshmen for those fall sports, as well as men's basketball and women's basketball on June the 29th. And then that final group would be our spring sports student athletes in men's and women's golf, men's and women's tennis, baseball, and softball. And based on the recommendations of the SEC task force and our student athletes, before they will be allowed to get into any of our facilities, they'll have to pass a physical exam. There'll be daily screenings for symptoms. There'll be a temperature screen. They'll be asked to maintain social distancing. They'll be asked to wear masks when entering and exiting the facilities. They will not be required to wear a mask while they're working out. There'll be scheduled workouts to manage the limited capacity that follow the Arkansas Department of Health guidelines. There'll be a coordinated entry and exit procedure to eliminate cross traffic. And each student athlete will be responsible for sanitizing their own individual workout stations. I'm sure many of you want to know about testing. We will not test all of our student athletes when they return to campus. That's following CDC guidelines. That's following the guidelines that the SEC Medical Task Force provided to us. We will be testing student athletes who are symptomatic, following our daily screening process, and those student athletes who are returning from any CDC identified hotspots. And that you will see that is one of the first differences between many of the SEC schools. There's some of my colleagues that they are testing every student athlete upon their return. We have decided, at the advice of our medical advisors, that's not the best course of action to proceed. So I think I'll stop right there, Kyle, and we can kind of get to some of the questions from the group.
Okay, you bet. Bob, you want to lead us off?
Come on, Bob.
Okay. Hunter, how much interaction have you had with parents of, student athletes from all sports? And has anybody expressed safety concerns? Has anybody said, hey, I appreciate what you guys are doing, but I just don't feel comfortable having my kid back on campus yet? What's that process been like?
Bob, last week we sent out a question and answer document to the parents of each and every one of our 465 student athletes. And then last Thursday night and last night, we had an hour Zoom call with any parents that wanted to join us to ask any questions that maybe we did not answer within the Q&A document. We probably had 150 parents between the two nights that participated in those Zoom calls. And I can tell you with great assurance that we didn't get any questions or concerns about student athletes from parents about returning their student athletes to our campus. I felt like the Q&A document and then these Zoom calls answered many of the questions. I think the parents of the majority of our student athletes have a great confidence in returning their sons and daughters to our campus.
Were you surprised that nobody said, hey, I'm not quite ready to let my kid get on campus yet? Or how'd that make you feel?
Well, I think if they're like me and they've had their children living at home for the past 7 or 8 weeks, 9 weeks, they're ready to get them out of the house. And I say that with some levity, Bob. But I thought that, that's what we've tried to do, is create a level of confidence in our plan that parents and student athletes and our staff, as we return to our work environments on campus and our student athletes return to campus, that they had some confidence. And I was very candid with the parents. I told them that there will be a student athlete who will test positive for COVID-19 on our campus. I think we're equipped to handle that. We have a plan to handle that. And all we can do is mitigate their risk to COVID-19. And there's a great deal of onus that's going to come on the shoulders of our student athletes, those young men and women. And they're going to have to take part in following the protocols and following the plan that we have in place to protect them and those that they come in contact with.
Trey?
Hey, Hunter, I was curious, and this is a hypothetical. I know you probably love those, but Iowa State brought out a plan to have fans in the stands, 30%, or excuse me, 50% capacity, 61,000 seat stadium, 30,000 fans. I was wondering where you guys are in terms of talks with that. Do you foresee fans being in the stands, and what does that look like for you guys, I guess?
Well, Trey, I will tell you that our number one priority right now is, and what we're preparing for, is to have full capacity in each of our athletic venues this fall. What I will tell you is that we also have plans in the background, preparations in the background that are being made if we have to limit capacity, whatever that may look like in any of our venues. We have sold approximately 31,000 season tickets for football. We have stopped selling any single game tickets for home or away games until we really figure out what that looks like definitively, because we don't want to sell thousands of single game tickets to our SEC games and then have to refund that money or decide which of those patrons cannot attend the games. And so that's probably the only measure we have taken to date until we really determine what that capacity looks like.
And does that look like something with fans entering the stadium? Would that be temperature taken with fans, entering, exit policy, all that kind of stuff, like you had with the athletes and facilities?
Yeah, I mean, we're taking a look at from the minute you arrive on campus, and we shuttle roughly 10,000 fans per football game from outlying lots to our stadium. And so, what does that look like from a shuttle bus capacity? And then, how do we queue people in line when they arrive at the gate? And do we have just go to a straight electronic ticket where there's not a paper ticket that you provide? How we queue you in line for concessions? I think it's unrealistic to think that we can, especially in the hot of September, that we can take a temperature of a fan that may have walked a few hundred yards to get to the stadium and that be an adequate reflection of whether or not they may exhibit a symptom. So I think that's highly unlikely.
Tara.
Yeah, so I was wondering about the dorms. Are they open for some freshmen or something to stay there when they get back on campus, or what's the situation?
Yes, Terry, there's a select number of residence halls that have remained open for international students and other students that have needed to remain on campus. Campus has never been officially closed, and so we're working with our Office of Housing when our freshman student athletes are able to come in for voluntary workouts, that they would have a place to stay on campus. It may not be the same room that they're going to be in when the fall semester starts in August, but there will be on-campus housing provided to those freshman student athletes.
And then how do you think the SEC has handled this whole situation and opening things back up?
I thought we arrived at a really good decision, and I credit Commissioner Sankey because we have 11 different states represented within the Southeastern Conference, and 11 states have been affected differently by this virus. And so to try to get 11 states and 14 schools on the same page, I can tell you was a challenge, but I think we arrived at a really good solution with this June 8th date to return to voluntary activities.
Tom?
Yeah, hey Hunter, I'm curious about the lead up to June 8th. What takes place before June 8th? Any testing or any preventive measures what you look at before the June 8th opening?
Yeah, sure. So our athletic trainers from those sports are in daily communication with their student athletes, and there's a daily screening process about their travels and who they have come in contact with, things of that nature. Many of our student athletes in those sports will start arriving back on campus next week and go through a very robust physical examination next week and have to be cleared to participate in any activity starting on June the 8th. And then we'll shut down all of our facilities on Thursday and Friday this week, and they will go through a very extreme disinfecting and sanitation process in preparation for our student athletes to return to campus and for some of our staff members to return to their work environments next week.
Okay, and what do the numbers look like? I'm asking for football and specifically total number of guys who might be available to start working out on June 8th, and what will the workout groups be limited to in numbers?
Those numbers, and I don't have those in front of me, but they'll follow the Arkansas Department of Health guidelines. So I think our groups will be, I think if I have this right, Tom, is about 16 in number in the football weight room at a time, and we'll use the upper and lower space. You know, we have the indoor and we have a weight room below, and we have the weight room upstairs. So those will be limited to 16 at a time. I think you will find that the majority of our returning football players will return to campus in time for the volunteer workouts on June the 8th.
Hutch.
Tom,
I
you're
think
muted.
all the questions that I had were asked already.
Tom, we'll come back to you.
Tom, you're muted if you had another question.
Oh, am I open now?
Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Your contact with the folks at Nevada and Notre Dame, what has that been like in terms of preparing for Nevada to come in and for you guys to go to Notre Dame?
I think much of what we're going through on our campus, Nevada is planning to be here on September 5th, and we're planning to be at Notre Dame on September the 12th. And whether there's limited capacity in any of those venues, it still remains to be seen. But we're all still planning to have those games.
Brandon Marcello, you got any questions?
Yeah, Hunter, I was wondering, as you go through this phase plan, are there any contingency plans, and what would it take for you to delay anything, if at all, if, say, a bundle of athletes were to be infected here in a couple or 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, we're prepared to deal with individuals, and if we have a mass outbreak, I mean, that will definitively change our plan. And that's the one thing about this plan, and it, quite honestly, we've been working on it for about 4 weeks, and it has probably changed every day in each of those 4 weeks, and it will continue to evolve and change and be fluid as the environment in which we're operating in evolves and changes. And so that's, what I told our performance team, which is our athletic training staff, our strength conditioners, our doctors, that what we have to be over the next 2 to 3 months, we have to be very flexible, we have to be very nimble, and we have to be able to adjust on the fly. And we've got to have a sense of humor because things change on a regular basis, and we're used to having things a certain way in college athletics and not adjusting to change very well. But our environment is changing, and it's changing every day.
Bobby.
Hey, Hunter, is there a date that you guys have set in mind that you may, okay, we can only allow this many people in the stadium? I know you mentioned that you've cut off single game tickets, but is there a date for the entire season, or is this going to be kind of a fluid deal?
What we have decided to discuss as an SEC leadership group is that we want to get as far into the summer as we can to make decisions about the capacity in our venues and the start of the season and things of that nature. I think you can back up roughly. We think we need 6 weeks to appropriately prepare our student athletes for a football season. So if you back up 6 weeks from September the 5th, that we've got to have some decisions made by early to mid-July, I think, on what our season looks like.
No, I was kind of asking more specifically about people in the stands. Is that something that can be decided 14 days out, or do you think you need more notice than that?
Yeah, I think we can have some flexibility with that piece, and obviously we've got to allow people to make plans. So if you're going to have let's say if we had a limited capacity, and whether it was less than the 31,000 season tickets we have sold, we're going to have some type of system where we allow a certain number of those 31,000 season ticket holders into the venue on September 5th. And so I think you've got to give a couple of weeks notice. We don't have a definitive date, Bobby, ironed out on that, but I think, you've got to have some decisions made in the early part of August in regards to that.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see here. Bob, do you have any more?
Yeah, Hunter, you kind of brought up how the student athletes, have to take the guidelines seriously. How confident are you that, people that young are going to be able to deal with the kind of restrictions that you guys are going to require of them in terms of social distancing, maybe wearing masks and things of that nature?
It will be a challenge, but I think probably what has been a bigger challenge is what they have experienced over the last 8 to 10 weeks. And I don't think any of those young men and women want to go through another period where they're not able to do what they love, and that's to practice and play their sport. But we're going to have some educational sessions with them, and the social distancing piece, it just can't be when we have a watchful eye on them in our campus venues. They've got to take some responsibility as young adults outside of our venues when they go back to their apartments and they go to their social settings. And that's an age that we all were at where you feel somewhat invincible when you're 18 to 22 and 23. But what they've got to take some responsibility is not just for themselves, but the people that they are around. And so it's going to be take a yeoman's effort on our part to educate them. But at some point in time, it's going to take an effort on their part to realize that, hey, we're doing this so that you don't go through what you just went through during the last 8 to 10 weeks.
And then with the basketball, I know obviously they missed out on spring and summer workouts where the coaches could be with the players. Are they going to be able, when these kids get back on campus, basketball specifically, are the coaches going to be able to have some interactions with them in terms of supervising workouts and doing individual things?
Not during the month of June, Bob. That was all voluntary workouts. So their strength coaches could be present for safety measures, but their coaches cannot be present. There can't be any workouts on the court, on the field, et cetera, with their coaches present during the month of June. This is all voluntary workouts. It's really just strength conditioning right now.
Great shot.
Hunter, what's been the reaction of the head coaches when you've talked to them about the plans that you have put in place for bringing the student athletes back on campus?
I think they've been very appreciative of the level of communication throughout this process. They have participated in the development of these plans. They understand the phased approach, and the only date that is definitive right now
these in 2-week increments is we want to make sure that we have that process correct and that we learn from what happens from June 8th to June the 12th, and then that we can make that better when that next group comes in on June the 22nd. But that June the 22nd could move up or it could move back based on how those first couple of weeks go. So that's why I said we have a plan, but the only date that's definitive right now is that June the 8th date. The other dates have some flexibility in them.
And then also, is there still no plans to furlough any employees of the athletic department?
That's correct. That's correct. The athletic, there's not been a member of the university staff, and remember, we're part of the university, we're an auxiliary, and so we will follow the lead of the university in regards to anything that happens with our faculty and staff, because we're part of the university staff trade. But there has not been anyone that has been furloughed. There's not been any salary adjustments to any of our staff members to date.
Otis, do you have any?
I'm on, Kyle.
Otis, do you have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, on June the 8th, you said the returning players, but on the June the 29th, we're like the grad transfers. Can they come in June the 8th? Not the ones that were on campus like Frank's and them, but I'm talking about the other kids that were grad transfers. Can they come on in June the 8th, or do they have to wait when the incoming freshmen come on the 29th?
Yeah, Otis, that's a great question. And so the decision to hold freshmen back until the 29th, that was really a decision that I made because it's hard enough to make an adjustment from being a high school senior to a freshman to a college campus. And I didn't want that adjustment to be why we were working through our plan on June the 8th, and where you didn't have an opportunity to work with your coaches and develop relationships with your coaches. And so the transfer student athletes have been through that experience, whether you're a grad transfer or just a transfer. You've been through your freshman year. You've been through that experience. You're more mature. And so our transfer student athletes will be able to come in on June the 8th because I just feel like there's a different level of maturity, and they've been through that adjustment of being a college student already.
Okay, on the freshmen who came in at midterm, can they come in on June the 8th, Hunter?
They can, yes.
Okay.
just been through that adjustment. And we mentioned before that every plan's tailored. Our plan is tailored to the University of Arkansas and the state of Arkansas, and I think you'll find that varies amongst our SEC colleagues. That there's some that are going to welcome their freshman student athletes on June the 8th. I made a decision. I'm the father of one former student athlete, one current student athlete, and understand the adjustment period for a young man or a young woman, and I just think it was the right thing to do to push that back to June the 29th.
Cliff?
Hey, how you doing? Thank you for doing this. I'm Cliff Brennan with the AP. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Cliff. Nice to meet you.
Yeah. So I just have a couple of things. Where will the tests come from, and how often do you plan to test?
Again, we will be able to test our student athletes at the Pat Walker Health Center on campus. Now, we're not planning on testing all of our student athletes when they arrive back on campus. We will test after a rigorous screening process that happens on a daily basis, any symptomatic student athletes or student athletes who are returning from any of the CDC-identified hotspots across our country. Otherwise, we have been advised that while testing is important, testing this group of student athletes when they arrive back on campus, it may not be the right course of action.
Okay. And then the other thing is, what kind of changes do you foresee just for athletes, just on a day-to-day basis, just like coming to practice, leaving practice? How do you see that aspect of things being different for athletes?
I think the first thing we're just trying to get through is that those first couple of weeks of workouts, Cliff. But I think what you will see different for athletes is they're working out, especially let's take football. They're used to working out offense together, defense together in large groups of sometimes as close to 50 guys. They're going to be in smaller subgroups of about 16. They will enter the building through one direction. They will exit to another direction. They will not have access to their locker room initially or to the student athlete lounge. We're working on a way to provide laundry service to them. Their meetings will be held through Zoom as they have been to date for the last 8 or 9 weeks. They'll go back, so they'll come in and work out, do their conditioning, and then they'll go back to their apartment or their residence hall and have Zoom meetings with their coaches. And so there's a lot of differences for our student athletes right now. I mean, you're part of a team, and I think it's our coaches are going to have their work cut out for them to really make these young men and women as a return to continue to feel part of the team, because it's going to be, at least early on, there's going to be very few instances where you're together collectively as a team.
I'm not sure Nate can, his audio situation. Nate Allen, can you hear me? Okay. Trey, do you have any more? Trey Biddy?
Yeah. Hunter, I was wondering, at some point this summer, before fall camp starts, would you like to see a ball introduced to the players, so they, not pads and helmets and all that stuff, but just a ball so they can run plays and I guess due to the lack of having a spring?
Absolutely. I mean, all of these games are played with balls, and when you just talk about football, basketball, soccer, volleyball, I mean, at some point in time, you've got to be able to have access to that piece of your game to really hone your craft.
Mm-hmm. Most people probably don't know that that's not allowed in the summer, but has there been talks with different groups about, that possibility, and what does that sound like?
There have been, and I mean, it's not that these young men and young women can't have balls. Like if they have, if Felipe Franks has a football and he gathers his receivers together and they find a place to throw balls, they can have access to balls. We just can't have oversight of that. Our coaches can't be involved in that process. But I think you'll see the leaders of all of our teams, football, soccer, volleyball, men's and women's basketball, they'll take some onus on themselves to figure that piece out.
Running back over to Tom, do you have any more?
Yeah, Hunter, best case scenario for starting fall camp. What's that date?
Well, I mean, I think the best case scenario is that we have some type of work that happens with our coaches and instruction with our coaches in mid-July that leads into the start of fall camp, which was originally scheduled for, I think, August 4th or 5th, Tom. So coaches have some access to work with these young men in mid-July, and then that bleeds into what the original date to start fall camp was.
The cost of sanitizing the facilities, have any idea what that rough number looks like and what it does to your budget?
I don't have an exact figure on that, Tom, that I feel comfortable providing for you today. But we will make the appropriate budget adjustments to make sure that the safety, health, and well-being of our student athletes and staff is taken care of. And then there'll be an added expense as we welcome fans back into our venues to appropriately sanitize and disinfect our venues prior to and after every game and even during the course of the games.
Nikki.
Hi, Hunter. Let's say a student athlete tests positive. Do you quarantine that athlete for 14 days, and then also all of the athletes, let's say in their workout group? How do you handle that situation?
Is Dave England on the call?
I don't think so, Hunter. Is he on there, KT?
Yes, I'm on here.
Dave is our director of sports medicine. Nikki, I'm going to let Dave answer that question for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, Nikki. Of course, the athlete that tests positive would be quarantined, and there's a big discussion on the contact tracing stuff about what is close contact. With the workout groups and the masks that we're wearing, that's going to take out a lot of individuals. I would foresee that if an athlete tests positive, that probably the people that's been in close contact with him, there's like a rule. It's a 6-foot rule for 15 minutes. That is one guideline. It's very vague, but I would foresee the roommates of that athlete for sure being quarantined along with them.
Thank you.
Matt Jones.
Hey, Hunter, what is or maybe Dave, you're the best one to answer this. What's the threshold as far as the temperature? You mentioned that they would have to have a fever to be checked for the virus to be tested. What's that threshold?
100.4, correct, Dave?
Yes, sir. That's our directive from the Department of Health is 100.4, and along with the screening, I think Hunter did mention that with the daily screening is for our athletes coming in to work out in the weight room, there will be daily temperature checks on that.
And you mentioned that there are hot spots and the athletes coming in from out of country. Will they be in any type of isolation or quarantine when they arrive on campus?
Some of those athletes that's been coming in from the hot spots have either come in here early or whatever. But with the Department of Health, if somebody's coming from a hot spot, they have to contact the Department of Health themselves, and then they are required to be in quarantine for 14 days.
And then, Hunter, I wanted to ask you too about you mentioned that you've sold 31,000 season tickets right now. Does that include student tickets? And how do you address how many students you can let into the facility in addition to whatever season tickets you've sold?
That does not include student season tickets. We generally start that student pass campaign in August when our students return to campus. And so I think we'll have a pretty good gauge on what that looks like, what the attendance looks like, the capacity could look like by the time we get around to selling the student access passes. So that number does not include those passes. And obviously, if our students are on campus, which they are expected to be this fall, we will make accommodations to have a certain number of students in our athletic venues to support our student athletes.
This one from the request line, Hunter. Nate Allen emailed me with his question. That answer leads into this question. If the UA does not open for classes on campus, can you foresee any circumstances that football would be played?
Well, that would be a decision that Chancellor Steinmetz and I would work together to make. I'm not going to back myself in a corner to say yes or no on that. The Chancellor has been dead set and is working feverishly to make sure that our campus is open with students on campus, and our student athletes are just at their students first and foremost. And so whether there is or is not a scenario where we would play football without students on campus, that's yet to be determined.
All right. Running out of time here. We've got probably 3 or 4 more questions. Bob, do you have any more?
Yeah, Hunter, I kind of forgot. Sons are part of the program. Obviously, you got a son on the team, and I think your other son's a GA. Obviously, you're the athletic director of the whole department, but do you think that gives you maybe some special perspective from a parent's perspective when you're dealing with the parents? Because you have a kid on the team too.
Well, I deal with their mother on a regular basis, asking me questions about how we're appropriately preparing the facilities for her one son to go to work and for her other son to start working out again. She really could care less about what I'm doing at the Broyles Center and how sanitized that is. I'm just kidding, Bob. So, no, I think it does give me a different perspective. And I said that is how I made the decision about freshmen student athletes not coming in on June the 8th, because, and I think that perspective of being a father of student athletes allowed me to make that decision, because I understand how difficult it is to go through that process as a young man or a young woman. So I do think that lends me a perspective about that, but I'm not treating this plan, our facilities, any differently or in any other nature because my sons are a part of the staff and the team.
And then, you mentioned you guys haven't had to do any pay cuts or furloughs or anything. A lot of schools are doing that, even big schools like I know Missouri, Iowa State, and some others, I'm sure. What do you think's been the key to you guys not having to do that? And thus far, at least, how good do you feel that Arkansas hasn't had to go to those extreme measures?
Well, we've done a great job, and those that came before me, and putting some money aside, both within the foundation, within a department, putting reserves aside to cover any shortfalls that we may have in this current fiscal year. I mean, the baseball program at most schools does not generate revenue. Our baseball program generates a significant amount of revenue through ticket sales, concessions, sponsorship sales, et cetera. So, we've been able to overcome some things, mainly because of the reserves. Now, we have a balanced budget that we submitted and that the Board of Trustees approved last week, but that balanced budget does include a full football season and a full basketball season and a full baseball season. So if those don't happen, we're going to have a revenue shortfall that we're going to have to account for.
Matt Jones.
This is a two-part question. First, am I correct that the 4 domestic hotspots are New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and New Orleans?
That's correct.
And how do you, so say like a city like New Orleans, is there a certain radius outside of the city that you have to account for? And then in those 3 states, is that more geared toward the New York metro area, or is it a statewide issue?
Matt, that's a great question. We have some student athletes. We have some football players that are from New Orleans. I think Dave England mentioned a couple of those guys have already made their way back to the area. They've reported their arrival to the Arkansas Department of Health, and they're currently under their 14-day quarantine period. And so I don't know if there's a radius, that's a great question, around the city of New Orleans that would exclude you from that right now. Unless, Dave, you've got any more to add to that, we've included anybody within the metropolitan area of New Orleans.
Right, Hunter. We, to answer that question, we had a classic example of that. We had somebody that actually lived a little bit outside New Orleans, and that's a decision that the Department of Health makes. Is that if we think they're coming from a hotspot, we contact the Department of Health, and then they make that decision whether they're actually coming from the hotspot and have to do the quarantine.
All right, we got time for maybe 2 more here. Let's see here. I'm going to open everybody up here, and if you've got one, let me know.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Just Hunter, you mentioned the inevitability of a student athlete testing positive. What is your confidence level that a season could continue if that happens, especially for teams with much smaller locker rooms than football?
Sure. I mean, that's, as we continue to work through that plan, Kyle, and the social distancing aspect of, the first part of this plan, this first phase of working out and conditioning affords us the opportunity to continue that social distancing practice. When you start practicing soccer or volleyball or football, it's inevitable that there's going to be close contact with those student athletes. And I think what we're all holding out hope for is that we get some better information about this virus in the coming weeks that allows us to return to practice with a greater level of confidence that student athletes wouldn't be impacted. But I can tell you some of the discussions we're having on the football part of it is normally you meet with all of your quarterbacks in the same room. Does that continue? Do you continue to meet like that? Do you go to Zoom call meetings, or do you have your first string quarterback meet with, and then the second string quarterback meets, and then the third string quarterback meets, so they're not in there together? Because what you don't want to have happen is the Friday before a game that your starting quarterback tests positive, and then because of his close contact with the second string and the third string and the fourth string quarterback, that you don't have a quarterback to put out there. So it's changing the way our coaches and all of our sports think about how they meet and interact with student athletes, and even to a point where how they may practice moving forward.
All right, that's going to wrap us up. Hunter, I appreciate the time. Thank you all very much taking the time out today to ask questions. If you need anything from us, please let us